Hello, everyone, and glad you can attend Attitude's weekly ADHD Experts webinar. Just an introductory note before we get started. If you've listened to one of our webinars before, you know we've been experimenting with adding a certificate of attendance. When the webinar ends, a post-event survey will pop up. It will list 3 questions about the quality of the webinar, followed by 3 questions titled Required for Certificate. If you would like a certificate of attendance emailed to you, you should answer those 3 questions. If you don't want a certificate, don't answer them. And while I'm in housekeeping mode, I want to mention that today's webinar sponsor is NEBA Health, Happy, Healthy Brains, and No Prescription Required. NEBA Health's Brain Booster Dietary Supplement is packed with great tasting, optimal ratios of omega-3s to support brain health in kids and adults. Visit nebahealth.com to learn more. And finally, Attitude webinar sponsors have no role in the selection of the expert's presentation, or any other aspect of the webinar production. So, today's topic is a challenge for almost every person diagnosed with ADHD, dealing with and preventing worries and anxiety from overtaking our lives. There's so much going on in our lives these days that our brains are overwhelmed attending to it all. Having ADHD increases the intensity and frequency of anxiety. Actually, I think anxiety is the top co-occurring addition with ADHD. So they go hand in hand in a lot of cases. As ADHD symptoms get in the way of us doing our best, shame enters the picture. And we worry that we might commit the same mistakes, being late for an appointment or job interview, saying something inappropriate to family or friends the next time. So anxiety winds up becoming a part of our lives. We're happy to have Dr. Lidia Zylowska here to give us all the latest information about how anxiety exacerbates ADHD symptoms and the best ways to dial down our worries. Dr. Zylowska is an associate professor at the University of Minnesota Department of Psychiatry. She pioneered the application of mindfulness in ADHD and developed the mindful awareness practices, or MAPS, for ADHD when she was at UCLA. She is author of the award-winning book, The Mindfulness Prescription for Adult ADHD. You can ask questions of Dr. Zylowska anytime during the webinar. We will try to get to as many of them as we can after her presentation. To download the presentation slides of this webinar, as I know many of you want to, click down the drop-down menu labeled Event Resources on the bottom left of your screen. If you do not see the Event Resources tab, you need to refresh the page. So now finally, let me turn it over to Dr. Zylowska. Great to have you here today, Lidia, to help us with this challenge.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all of you for tuning in. As Wayne introduced, anxiety and ADHD often coexist, so I'll talk a little bit about that. And oftentimes they really feed into each other. So anxiety makes management of ADHD more difficult. Having ADHD makes anxiety more likely to happen and perhaps more intensely experience. Now, mindfulness is something I've been doing for a long time, and it's been such an important practice for myself in my own life and my work with patients with ADHD and other patients. I think it's a skill that can help in many stressful situations and can help manage anxiety when it's happening. It can help us learn from anxiety and offer some options of how to deal with it. So, how the two interplay is that you can have anxiety and worry resulting from ADHD, as I mentioned, and they can also be independent of each other. Anxiety can co-occur with ADHD and be kind of independent conditions that need to be treated. And I have to say, it's not always easy to know what are we dealing here with. And sometimes it's a frustration for patients. Some of you might have experienced this. It can be a frustration for clinicians not knowing, what is the main thing here? Is it the anxiety? Is it ADHD? What should we treat first? So, one way to try to distinguish the two is that if the anxiety and worry is related to behaviors that come from ADHD, so worry about being late, worry about not getting tasks done, remembering difficulties related to executive function, not being able to finish things, having prior failures, maybe difficulties with how you interact with others. And a lot of the worry and anxiety is around that, that this may happen again, and, not quite believing that you can control it. Then I think treating ADHD first would make sense. If the anxiety is more generalized, not just around ADHD challenges, but perhaps related to your health, world events, relationship, finances, to the point when it's sort of uncontrollable and generalized, then we might call it generalized anxiety disorder, which is separate from ADHD. And there's also some specific anxiety disorders like social anxiety, really difficulty with being in new social situations, or perhaps, in a situations when you talking to your boss or authority figure, being out in public may be very difficult. Panic disorder is another condition that kind of has a life of its own when you have repeated kind of moments of intense anxiety. OCD is quite common with ADHD, and other more specific anxieties like flying phobia. Wayne mentioned that anxiety is one of the most common co-occurring conditions in ADHD, and it's estimated that from 25 to 40% of those with ADHD have a separate ADHD anxiety disorder, and sometimes the estimates are closer to almost 50%. And I think the anxiety resulting from ADHD is probably something that everyone experiences if they have ADHD. It comes up at times when there may be particular challenge with ADHD, or perhaps when the lives are more stressful in general, it's harder to manage the anxiety. So here, I have this sort of a picture to remind us how much anxiety feeds into ADHD and ADHD feeds into anxiety. You can have issues, will be on, I guess, the left side of the slide, with ADHD issues with executive function, working memory problems, not remembering things, kind of getting into your own way because of that, and then worrying about that. Having procrastination tendency, avoiding certain things that are difficult, and then actually by the procrastination can then increase the worry. It's a kind of short-term solution of, okay, I'm not dealing with this right now, but there can be this kind of more generalized background anxiety growing as there are things you need to be attending to and you're not. Difficulty with focus, having great intentions to get something done and then finding yourself being distracted and then worrying about your own ability then to focus. So self-doubt is a big part of ADHD. Once anxiety and worry are significant, then there is exhaustion, there can be overwhelm, there can be amplify anxiety with fear and shame, and that itself can really deplete the executive functions. And make dealing with ADHD more difficult. So it's often this kind of a spiral that has to be addressed, and depending which one is more predominant, ADHD or anxiety, sometimes we treat one first. This is tricky if somebody has a co-occurring anxiety disorder. If you're trying to treat ADHD, the anxiety may get worse. As you may know, stimulants can make anxiety worse. So then we have to really be creative and treat the anxiety first, typically maybe with antidepressants or maybe with other anti-anxiety options like CBT therapy before the ADHD can be addressed. So one option in trying to untangle the two is mindfulness. And I want to focus on that today. And I see mindfulness really as one tool in a toolbox of treating ADHD that can be combined with other things, with medications, with therapy, with supplements, with lifestyle change. But mindfulness, I think, is one way of really even knowing yourself and kind of knowing what helps you, like understanding the problem and then knowing the solutions more easily. So what is mindfulness? I'm sure you've heard the term, many of you. There are many ways of describing it. I want to focus on mindfulness as an attention training. It's a way to bring attention to present moment, particularly your inner experience inside of you, and training attention to connect with that present moment as much as possible throughout your activities, throughout your day. The training can be done in the context of meditation, contemplative traditions, or it can be done in the course of a day, kind of brief mindfulness reshifts. So we'll talk about that. And before we talk about a little bit more about the different ways mindfulness is defined, I want you to read this quote, which I love, from a psychologist, 19th century psychologist, William James, who said, "My experience is what I agree to attend to." So my experience is what I agree to attend to. And that's been kind of my personal, guiding quote in a way, that our attention really determines what our experience is. Imagine you're on the beach and you're wrapped up in worries and thinking about what's going to happen the next day, perhaps at work or at home. You have beautiful scenery in front of you. There could be, beautiful sunshine, beautiful ocean in front of you on the beach, but yet you're not seeing it. You're not attending to it. You're not experiencing it because you're all wrapped up in the worry. So where the attention goes that's where, almost you could say, our lives go. That's where our lives happen. And here's another quote that's been really important as well in my understanding of mindfulness. This comes from Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, a very well-known book. And he said that between stimulus and response, there's a space. And that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. So it really points to the thing that's often hard with ADHD, is that moment of reflection, to choose response, to know that what's happening is perhaps not, all the options in what you see and how you respond to it. It's finding that space between anxiety and worry and yourself and what you do about it. So mindfulness teaches us to train attention, to find that space, and it's opposite of the automatic pilot. So it's helpful to contrast the two. The automatic pilot is the way we can be when we're acting out of habit, when we're on kind of automatic. And that relates to behaviors or actions, but also relates to our thinking, because our thoughts can happen on an automatic pilot. And when anxiety is significant, worries and anxious thoughts happen automatically. You can have thoughts that feel uncontrollable. It's hard to stop them. And they can really feel like that's all there is. That's the truth. This is so overwhelming. I can't do this. I'm a failure. I don't know how to proceed from this. So the first thing that mindfulness can do for us is actually to notice that you are being on this automatic pilot, that you're getting lost in thinking and really not having that space. So here are some ways we think of mindfulness, this antidote to automatic pilot. A couple definitions. One, a traditional coming from Buddhist tradition, that mindfulness is moment by moment awareness that happens to us and in us. And I added in parentheses the non-reactive. So being able to witness things as they are without fully reacting to them, and choosing what our reaction is. Another definition is from Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn, that mindfulness is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And that's a very well-known definition that points to two aspects of mindfulness. It has to do with attention, so paying attention in the present moment, lots of different things in the present moment, and we'll talk about kind of what to focus on when you're anxious. And also bringing attitude of curiosity, non-judgment, and also attitude of compassion when you are attending to the present moment, when you're attending to yourself, to your thoughts, to your emotions in the present moment. I mentioned there are many ways to learn mindfulness. There are formal ways, meaning meditation practice, often done in a sitting, quiet sitting way, sometimes walking mindfully. There are mindful activities in daily life. There's yoga. It's another way of learning present moment awareness. I very much value kind of brief shifts into mindful state in the course of a day. So learning to do what's called the informal or in daily life practices that you can bring to anything that you're doing. Any activity can be done in a more mindful way than typically. And I think for ADHD, that has a lot of value. Sometimes the formal practices or keeping the formal practice in your life is difficult. And so actually, learning how to tune in just for, half a minute into the present moment, has value. And then doing that many times in the course of a day or a week can strengthen that ability, can kind of train that attentional muscle to know that you have the option of bringing attention to the present moment. Here's a quick reminder that mindfulness, as we now have studied it with neuroimaging and have brought the neuroscience knowledge into knowing what mindfulness is, really points to its ability to self-regulate, to teach us self-regulation skills, that we can learn to self-regulate our attention, our emotions, and our actions. And the brain areas responsible for those skills, which are often affected by ADHD, the attentional circuits, the prefrontal cortex, also, the reactivity of amygdala that has to do with intensity of emotions, that those things, those regions can be modified through regular mindfulness practice. So let's talk about mindfulness and how you can bring it to anxiety. So I have kind of a series of pictures like this to show you how I think of kind of stepwise approach to treating anxiety with mindfulness. So there are sort of times when the anxiety is so intense, you are in this automatic pilot, all your attention, and on this picture you can see the arrow kind of going from the head to the worry. All your attention, all your awareness is kind of wrapped up in the worry. That can often happen, when you're stressed, you wake up in the middle of the night and you can see, all I'm thinking about is the worry, is something that is on my mind that's anxiety provoking. And then with that, there can be a response in the body. It's a mind-body state. You can have a sense of tension in the body. Can be a sense of you can notice, tension in your jaw and your shoulders. You can clenching your teeth. You can feel also, overwhelmed, feel like there's, kind of hopeless, narrow perspective at what can I do here? And then also feel paralyzed or really not knowing what to do with the anxiety. And so if that happens, when you kind of catch yourself, in that place, it really helps to first even recognize, I'm stuck in the worry. And this approach that I'll be describing, I want to acknowledge, it's adapted from work by Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz with his work with OCD. So as you know, OCD obsessive compulsive disorder is often characterized by these kind of obsessive, repetitive, intense thoughts that's hard to shake them off. But we can think of the same thing happening when you have intense worry, not necessarily OCD, or when you have stress and perhaps some distressing situation. We often have these repetitive thoughts that are hard to shake about the situation. So the first thing would be to actually just name what's happening. Say, I'm really worried, I'm having a hard time, or I'm overwhelmed. So that's really kind of this idea of you name it, you can tame it. The first thing is just to step out of this automatic being wrapped up and lost in thinking and try to have a little bit of a stepping back, a little bit of a perspective just by naming what's happening. And then you have the option of trying to see if you can create even more space from the worry. So that's working with attention and moving it away from worry. So like the arrow going up from your mind, from your head to the worry cloud, you kind of try to take the attention away and put it on something in the present moment. And that really is attention training, trying to weaken that link between worry and you being kind of lost in the worry. So starting to notice there's worry, you're not making it go away completely, but you are learning to move attention away to something else. And there's lots of different things you can shift it to. Breathing is often recommended because breathing by itself is a strategy to change the mind-body state, and you can find different ways of breathing to help bring the anxiety down. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But just bringing attention to things like breathing, sounds in the room, attending to your body. I call it the 3 anchors to the present moment: sound, breath, body. It gives you this place, kind of a little refuge from being overly focused on the worry. Or connecting to 5 senses. So 5 senses, like sense of smell, a sense of touch, even looking around, noticing shapes and colors. Mindful eating is a great practice of, slowly drinking tea, for example, or slowly eating something, really tasting the flavor and the textures. And so you're putting all the attention on the activity and trying to, again, move away from the worry. And it's almost as, let's do something else than worrying. Let's try to create a little bit of a distance between the anxiety and myself. Again, doesn't work 100% typically, but it can give you a bit of a perspective shift. And so first, you're really learning to bring attention back from the worry. Then you go back into the worry, and you bring attention back to sound, breath, body, for example, or some other activity. So if you're doing breath work, if you're focusing on the breath, there are many different ways to do that. Some easier, some more difficult. And I always recommend find what works for you. Try different ways. Sometimes just watching your breath, just watching the breath coming in and going out can be enough. You're not changing your breath, you're just watching it how it is. But just by shifting to noticing the breath can bring the stress down. Sometimes, you notice it's very hard for me to stay with the breath. So counting can help, having imagery with that, let's say imagining a wave or, a fresh energy coming in as you take a breath in, imagining letting go of stress as you're breathing out. That can be helpful. Putting hand on the belly. In mindful breathing, we want to practice or promote relaxed breathing, which is not the chest breathing, but belly breathing. So sometimes putting a hand on your chest and on the belly, just sensing, where's my breath from? And if it's a lot coming from chest, because that's where the anxious or stressful breathing comes from, seeing if it's comfortable to shift it more to the belly. Or finding a place that feels perhaps safer than the breath. It could be just noticing the sensations in your palms as a place where you park your attention, so you are moving away from the worry. There are techniques called pace breathing that can also physiologically shift you into more relaxed state by activating the autonomic nervous system, activating the parasympathetic nervous system into more of a relaxed state. So there are different ways of practicing it. There are different numbers that people tell you to do. For example, doing 4 counts on inhale, 4 counts on the pause between inhale and exhale, 4 counts as you exhale, and then another 4 counts on the breath. So it's called the square breathing. And that could be a nice visual to think about, kind of breath in, pause, breath out, pause. What I found it difficult to keep track of the numbers. The square breathing is pretty simple. There are other ones like 4, 6, 7 breathing or other pace breathings. For me, the image that helps me to do this kind of breathing is to think of a slide in a playground. I have a 5-year-old, so it's an imagery I see quite a bit. So as you think of taking the breath in, is like climbing the slide up and pausing right on top. And that's the pause between in-breath and out-breath. And then as you slide down, it's this kind of letting out the exhale and being a little longer than the inhale. So that can actually activate this more relaxed place within our body and our physiology. So in, you climbing up, a little pause, and then exhale a little longer than the inhale. And, in those times when anxiety is intense, is as you name it, you say, okay, I'm really anxious, I'm really overwhelmed, and naming it with compassion, naming it with kindness or a sense of again, not judging yourself for it. And then trying to refocus, whether it's mindful breathing, mindful activity, but also thinking, what else can I refocus on? What else can I do that can help me dial it down? There's lots of different techniques. DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, is one approach that I think is very well suited for ADHD. There's lots of different distress tolerance skills. Many are rooted in mindfulness, taking a warm shower, going into the garden smelling, let's say, the fragrance of the plants outside, doing even putting something cold over your eyes. That can kind of shift again from anxiety. Doing exercise, going for a walk, being in nature, sometimes writing things down. Music for some people can shift you again out of the mind-body state of anxiety, and you're trying to, as you recognize it, you're trying to see, what can I do to bring it down? Because as I bring it down, I will be able to solve it a little bit easier. Sometimes it's too hard when this is very active. So how can I bring it down? For some, their spirituality, prayer can be helpful. And lastly, if it's too hard to do it on your own, talking with someone. I think it's Dr. Hallowell said, never worry alone, or perhaps someone else said this, but it's this idea that when we're overwhelmed, when the anxiety is intense, being there with someone, being able to verbalize it, you naming it for them, it can often be a way to step back and dial it down. And finally, sometimes you may need medications. Or perhaps before you even go to medications, you'll try a soothing tea, try a supplement for anxiety. And so you're trying to change the physiology in these other ways to help you gain some space. And once you're able to step back and have a little bit of control over the anxiety, mindfulness can also teach you then to come back to the situation that was creating anxiety with a little bit more ability to then learn from it. So it's here I call it returning with this space of mindful awareness. So you're coming back and you can say, here's the worry, here's the stress, but how can I kind of be with it without getting sucked into it? How can I observe it as a witness, as someone who is, there's more to me than just these thoughts. There's this space of awareness that I can connect with. And so seeing your thoughts as thoughts, seeing worry as, this is a worry thought. Can I look at it? Can I understand it? And then also seeing what else is here. Is there a feeling attached to it? Worry is often a way of trying to control feelings, trying to feel that you have a solution. And we worry because we're planning and trying to figure out what to do. And if we're worrying about something we can control, it becomes a very tricky situation. You're worrying about things that, that you really can't do much about it. For example, when will this happen? Or were you waiting for something and worrying about it? So learning to notice there's a worry thought, and then can I actually, is this worry something I can do? I can address, I can do something about. And if not, accepting and letting go. So, mindfulness can help you with the discernment. Is the worry something I can address, or is this something I can just tolerate and live with uncertainty for a bit, and be okay with that? And it's very difficult sometimes to stay in that space of, okay, I'm having anxiety. It's here. It's really affecting me. Can I still go about my day because I know there's nothing I can do about it? That we call it, learning to tolerate uncertainty. There are situations when you say, okay, I can't do anything about this, but maybe I can at least do that, or I can communicate with someone about what's going on for me, or I can maybe, let them know that I'm really worried about not getting this done, or I'm really worried. I can communicate with the person about my ADHD difficulties, or I can, contact a therapist. So there are ways to address things even when they're a little bit difficult for us to deal with. Mindfulness, the value of mindfulness is that it teaches you what is it that you need in the situation of anxiety. So, for example, to be a little bit more specific, if you are noticing that a lot of your anxieties around not finishing work, let's say, or not starting a particular task, learning to sort of sit with that feeling and say, okay, I'm avoiding the task. What's stopping me? Is it that it's a very complex task and I don't know how to start, so I really maybe need help from someone? Or, is it that I have this strong desire to be perfect, and and unless I have everything in place, unless I have, the things are coming out perfect for me as I go about the task, then I'm not able to finish it, or I'm not able to get it done? Is it that there is a sense of really self-doubt, and maybe a lot of criticisms at yourself about getting this task done, and constantly berating yourself? Oh, you should have done it this way, or should have started this way, or comparing yourself to others. So noticing the thoughts that go along with the anxiety, and noticing the feelings that are below. Is there fear that I'm going to start and I'm going to find out I don't know how to do it, or I'm going to forget, and then I started and then I never finished that, and with that, you've had previous experiences of maybe starting, not finishing tasks. So there is a real evidence that this can happen again. There is this constant worry and anxiety, and sometimes, as you're stressed, then it's harder to focus and get things done. So sitting with all of that, I think, is a key to actually have enough data or information to know how is the anxiety affecting me? What's triggering it? What are some of the things that are amplifying the anxiety and the worry for me? And what are the things I can do about it? And what are the things I can't do anything about? So once you have all the information, what's important is to develop this inner voice. I call it mindful self-coaching, that can help you then move through it. It may be saying, lateness is a problem for you, okay? And you can feel the anxiety because you ended up leaving a little bit too late. You didn't notice the time. Can I be compassionate to myself that this has happened? And feel the feeling of either it's, anxiety, fear, embarrassment, maybe anger at yourself. Hold that, again, with awareness, with compassion, and then say, what can I do in this moment? Maybe I can take a deep breath, and maybe I can call whoever I'm meeting to let them know I'm late. And so at least I can be proactive about this. And for the next time, really trying to think about, how can I have reminders or things to help me to deal with the lateness. So developing the inner voice that is compassionate and ADHD informed, that says, I know this is hard for me. This is, this is what comes from ADHD. I have to learn to know more about it, have some strategies. I want to be accountable, communicate that with others, using very standard things like calendar, to-do lists, prioritizing in a way that works for you, that you find, there's lots of different ways to have to-do lists or keeping a calendar, finding a way that works for you. So using this mindful awareness, self-awareness to also, find the system that you can keep up with most of the time. So you may still not use it all the time, but most of the time. And, one thing that often happens with ADHD is that people get overwhelmed with what's happening in their lives. And that drives stress, and that drives anxiety, that can drive not sleeping well, that can drive feeling more scattered. And the overwhelm is from overcommitting yourself. Saying yes to things, saying yes to things that are novel, exciting, but perhaps we don't have time in our lives for it. But in the moment of excitement about it, you're not thinking about everything that goes into the task. Or it may be very difficult to say no to someone because you don't want to make them not like you. There may be a tendency for people pleasing, getting yourself to overcommit. Or honestly really feel in that moment, I can do it all. But something happens next week, that becomes another stress in your life. And then you realize I really overschedule myself so tight that there's no room for error. There's no room to really deal with things when they don't go, they don't happen perfectly. So really reflecting on that, how much stress is in my life, how much anxiety is in my life because of this, and connecting with what's important, with your values. What are some of the things you can do in maybe this phase of your life, and maybe some things that will have to wait, or maybe you'll make time for it in next month. But trying to really prioritize these kind of commitments and what you say yes to. With that, kind of this general overview, I wanted to give you a little bit of a little practice that I think is helpful. This is a practice called STOP. Some of you might know about it. It's a common mindfulness practice of just briefly checking in with yourself in the present moment. And each letter kind of reminds you of what to do. So it's just stopping or pausing what you're doing. Then taking a breath or a few breaths, observing in the present moment. And that really often means noting maybe sounds around you, noticing what's happening, but very much observing what's happening inside. So shifting attention inward, noticing your thoughts, your feelings, your body sensations, the energy in your body, kind of what you might be needing in that moment. And then proceeding kind of with now more awareness, with more space, and making some choices. So maybe all of us can do it right now, this little practice. So for a moment, and if you want, you could close your eyes for a moment, or if you don't want to do that, you can just rest it in one spot. And taking a few breaths. Just noticing your breath coming in, your breath going out. Noticing the pauses in between in-breath and out-breath. And maybe noticing a little bit more, how is this moment for you? What do you notice for yourself right now? How are you feeling? Any thoughts or feelings that are present? How's your body feeling? Not judging yourself for what's present. I mean, you may be comfortable or uncomfortable at this moment, liking or not liking what's happening, just noticing what is. And, you could practice this for a minute, for 5 minutes, however however it's comfortable for you or how much practice you've had, and then kind of moving on with your day with this, with giving yourself that moment of reflection. And mindfulness is really a practice that becomes easier as you practice it. That never becomes completely easy. It's not natural for us to be always in the present moment, and it's actually not something you would always want to be in a present moment. Our thoughts and our ability to plan and imagine and having creative thought, it's takes us away from the present moment, and that's good. But in the moments of stress, kind of checking in and knowing inward what what your thoughts, what your reactions are, and having some choice about it can be really a game changer. So here's some books I wanted to highlight. Wayne mentioned I have a book called Mindfulness Prescription for Adult ADHD, which is sort of a primer in different mindfulness practices. And there's some books out there. There's many more than this, but a couple the few I wanted to highlight that are particularly for anxiety. And then lots of apps that you can try to kind of get a hang of this practice and find one that works for you. So with that, I'll turn over to questions, and I hope we are able to have a good dialogue now.
Okay, Lidia, thank you. That was excellent. That meditation almost made me a little too relaxed. That was wonderful. I knew this question would pop up. How do you get the brain to settle down? I try to meditate, but my ADHD brain keeps going and I'm down on myself. I keep talking myself down. So Is there any extra tips you might have to at least minimize that?
Yeah, so different ways to go about it. One would be to really do something physically exerting, exercise, or maybe, get in a sauna if you have access to one, and just helping your body relax first. So by relaxing the body first, the mind can settle and not be as busy. And so before you sit to meditation, maybe do exercise, go for a walk, do yoga. Yoga is wonderful that way, that you're doing some physical exertion before you sit down and do some practice. So letting the body relax and help your mind settle, that can be helpful. Another way would be to just, notice what happens when you sit down and how busy your mind is, and just watch that for some time and not berate yourself for it. There's no, some goal of meditation. The goal of meditation is awareness of what is. So if what is that, the busy mind is happening, maybe having curiosity about it. How does this happen? How you notice that there's this thought or this image, or, you're jumping around, and periodically make a decision to come back to your breath. And then it probably will happen again. And then you come back to the breath, and just being okay with that back and forth, because you're learning about, what is your experience like in this moment. And then it might slowly settle down. It might not. Sometimes it doesn't. But just doing this shift into mindful perspective and observing can help. The other thing is, experimenting with medication. Could you try doing meditation after taking your stimulant medication, for example? Is it easier? Is it harder? I've heard both ways, actually. Some people find that, once they take medication, they just want to attend to the task of the day. They feel impatient just doing the practice. Others have said, if I take a little bit of a stimulant, I feel a little bit more relaxed and I can do the practice. So, those are different suggestions. And then there's also mindful walking, which is easier than sitting. And I think mindful walking in nature is a really beautiful way to try to connect with more present moment, because, as you're walking, you can attend to the sensation on your feet, or just even the movement of your legs or your arms. You can notice the nature around you. And that's a way of moving away from that mind. So you remember that cloud of worry, you can actually shift your attention awareness away from it. And weaken the link between this unsettled mind, busy mind, and your experience in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are good tips. I especially like walking in nature, so I do understand the value of that. And a woman is asking, anxiety and ADHD often make me start binge eating. How can I practically use mindfulness to break the circle of anxiety, binge eating, increased anxiety, more binging, etc.?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's, we use food to help us feel better. I mean, food often is used as a kind of emotion regulation strategy to relax our bodies. So I think what's important is to at first try to notice, and you already are, whoever asked that question, this connection, right? That when I'm anxious, I tend to binge eat. And try to, when you notice yourself kind of going for the food, or noticing this wanting to eat, if you could actually just try to work with that impulse a little bit, and kind of feel a little bit more in your body what's happening. Is there, it's the anxiety that's driving it, but what if you ended up maybe doing some mindful breathing, or choosing to do something else? So removing yourself from the anxiety by doing something else, but other than eating, and trying to break that link, that connection. So perhaps the anxiety will be a little bit less. And so when you are around food again, it's not so impulsive perhaps, or so it's not this strong coping strategy to overeat. And I think feelings drive our anxiety, and they drive our impulsive actions, and can very much drive problematic eating. So trying to be with feelings that may be popping up for you around anxiety. Is there a fear? Is there shame? Is there maybe frustration that's fueling it? Maybe journaling about what feelings you're noticing, like journaling, or even talking to a therapist about what's happening. But first, starting with just being curious, what happens for me? That, in that transition from I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling distraught, and maybe without fully examining that, automatically going to eating. So can mindfulness help me? And I presented that, there are these strategies to dial down anxiety when it's intense. So trying to get away from the anxiety, kind of to weaken the link. And there are strategies that to stay with anxiety and kind of learn from it. So if for you, the first one, maybe, the more doable one is to actually just try to change the behavior, and, being away from foods, or maybe not buying foods you typically over binge on, is one strategy of impulse control, is to know that if I have these foods around me, I will go there to help me with my stress. So what else can I do when I do recognize I'm stressed?
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of parents out there basically asking the same question. That is, they find that mindfulness and meditation helps them, but they're trying to convince their son or daughter with ADHD to meditate or practice mindfulness, and they're just looking for any tip or tidbit you can possibly provide to persuade them, the child.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I have a 5-year-old myself, and, he's a hyper little boy, and always on the go. So it's very hard to get him to do any, meditation or I try to teach him breathing with some success. But, I think modeling breathing and taking a few breaths to your child when you're upset, kids are a sponge. They will learn that by observation, that this is a good thing. Like, let's take a few breaths together. There are techniques that are adapted for kids. And Susan Kaiser Greenland, some of you might know her work, has put out books on how to adapt mindfulness for kids. So I would, you can check out a book called Mindful Child. Or you can look at another publication of hers called Mindful Games, little games that really help children bring them to the present moment. One technique is having the child lay on their back, put a little toy, maybe a little stuffed bear, on their belly, and have them watch the bear go up and down. So you can call the game taking the little bear for a ride on the belly, and then they can, as they watch it, they can really kind of settle down. Some simple mindful yoga can be helpful for kids. Movement, is easier for kids. And there's also stories. There are, CDs that you can buy with either imagery, relaxing imagery for kids. And that does teach them to kind of use imagery to relax their bodies. And you can help them to say, well, how do you feel after hearing this story? Or, what's your body like? What is your breath like? With my son, we do, there are these stories. There's one, there's lots of different options. One I've used is called, it's by Lori Light, Lite, Indigo Dreams. And she has these really beautiful stories that are appropriate for at least, 5-year-olds or so, or even older children. When it's, a story of a caterpillar helping, a little girl helping a caterpillar relax when the caterpillar is stressed, or having a little boy and a turtle kind of learning to relax their body together. So those are kind of stories, we could say mindful stories. One app called Stop, Breathe, and Think is really tailoring their meditation to kids and young adults, teens and young adults. So that might be one to check out. But parents are the main teachers. If you can kind of model, or even like when you're stressed out, let's go for a walk. Let's do something that's relaxing. That can really stick with kids.
Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little about dialectic behavior therapy? Because you mentioned it, and you don't have to go on and on about it, but people just want to know how it helps, the benefits, how you might find a practitioner.
Yeah, so dialectical behavior therapy was developed by Marsha Linehan, a psychologist. And, if you look it up, you'll see lots and lots of resources on that. And it was developed for people with intense emotions, and also even intense suicidal thinking and self-injury. But the techniques there are really applicable to all of us. In the moments of strong emotions, of strong distress. So they have different strategies called distress tolerance skills that can help you kind of bring down intense emotions. There you can find there's one called Improve the Moment. So kind of how you attend to yourself in the moment to help you get the emotion down. There is, as I mentioned, one would be, putting ice over your eyes. Mm-hmm. So like a cold pack over your eyes will activate parasympathetic nervous system. It can dial down the intense emotion or anxiety. It may be using, strong sensory input, like a really strong smell. Lavender is one that we use because it also has calming properties. It could be even holding onto an ice cube. So you feel this strong feeling. And so it can kind of snap you out of kind of being stuck in reactivity or maybe a mind state that's really, you can lose perspective. You can feel like, I'm terrible, or this is terrible, he's terrible, she's terrible. We can all be very sucked into kind of this reality sometimes that's very narrow and driving our stress. So trying to get out of that. There is this website that I really like that has a nice packet for people who are interested in learning more about DBT. Let me bring that up in just a moment. It's a website from UK. I think it's getselfhelp.com. Let's see. It's getselfhelp.co.uk. And if you look up dealing with distress, that will give you some strategies and very kind of a nice different options of how to deal with this stress, how to get yourself out of this place, this state, when you're spiraled in, and and at that point maybe your reserve to deal with the issue are very limited. So how to get yourself out so then you can come back and problem solve later on.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned stimulants possibly settling the mind so you can actually engage in mindfulness. Are there any supplements or herbs? I know you can't prescribe stuff, but have you found that your client, people you work with, can solve that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that's another conversation because there's lots of options.
Okay.
But I would say, I'll mention a couple that I've used within the context of ADHD. One is L-theanine, which is theanine is a component of tea. It's been shown to help with anxiety and without making you tired or sedated or kind of affecting alertness. So that's not, we don't want that with ADHD. You want to be alert and focused and yet be more calm. So L-theanine may be something to look into.
Could you spell that quickly?
It's Theanine.
Okay.
Theanine.
Right.
And oftentimes it's L and dash theanine, or it could be just theanine.
Mm-hmm.
Another herbal supplement I've used is Bacopa, B-A-C-O-P-A, Bacopa. And that's another one that kind of can help with anxiety and also help with cognitive issues. But this is just a sampling. And, it would be important to check it out, perhaps with whoever you're working with, physician or even a therapist, to kind of help you determine, is this the right supplement for me? Those are a couple of options.
Right. And you mean to put you more in the mood to practice mindfulness, or are you just talking about addressing anxiety in a general way?
This is more addressing anxiety in a general way.
Oh, okay.
I think, in general way, not necessarily something that you would do right before you try to meditate. I think right before, I would say, if you're really having a hard time sitting down, do mindful walking, do some exercise, go for a walk in nature as an alternative practice, maybe do mindful gardening as alternative practice, or, be kind of curious about what it's like when I have very active mind and very active body and I'm sitting here. Maybe for a minute or two, I can watch this and have compassion about it before I move on. And that's a valuable practice too. The other thing is it's easier to practice with others. So if you find it's difficult to do it on your own, being in a group with other beginners and sharing what you're noticing, and there's something in a group that can help people relax together. So, playing with that as well.
Yes. Well, I think the hour is up, or very close to being up. Everyone had lots of great questions, and of course, your expertise and insights were fantastic.
Thank you.
So I wanted to thank you for being here and sharing your expertise with us.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here as always, and thank you for the great questions and the interest in this. Yeah.
Okay. And thanks to all you attendees for being here as well. Let's see. And I just want to read the copy about the sponsor of today's webinar. It's NEBA Health. Happy, healthy brains and no prescription required. NEBA Health's Brain Booster Dietary Supplement is packed with great tasting, optimal ratios of omega-3s to support brain health in kids and adults. So if you want to know more about it, visit nebahealth.com. And this is actually the last experts webinar for 2019. The first webinar of 2020 will be on January 9th, when Linda Rogley will kick off the new year with a topic that's dear to all our hearts, conquering clutter. So I hope you'll be there for that. And thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, and have a great day.